I'm Jessica Wilson, and you're listening to Making It Awkward. Thanks so much to those of you who have shown your support for this podcast by joining the Patreon and keeping the project sustainable. Folks can find that information in the show notes. Today's conversation is one of the richest I've had yet. I talk with Tigress Osborn, the executive director of the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, about Law INT 0209 that Stephanie referenced in last week's episode. She gives some ideas for those who want to be involved with banning discrimination based on body size in your cities and states. We also talk about NAAFA's decision to partner with Dove on the legislation. I asked Tigress about the anti-fat and pharmaceutical-funded organizations out there that camouflage themselves as advocacy organizations, and she tells me her thoughts about celebrities partnering with Novo Nordisk, including Queen Latifah. We discuss the Ozempic of it all and end with fat joy. Like I said, a conversation with so much breadth and depth. A note that we say obesity a bunch of times during this episode, and it's all with air quotes. But first, a shout out to all of the clinicians to divest from IADEP after hearing the episodes about the organization. I appreciate you all. Thanks to the folks like Inspired Nutrition and Mental Health Counseling in Pittsburgh for talking about your decisions on social media and letting others witness that process. It's great when y'all are able to put yourselves out there with the potential for things to get awkward. With that, let's get into the interview. Tigress, welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm so happy to be here.
I am ecstatic that you've joined us today. Tell us a bit about yourself.
So I'm Tigress Osborn. My pronouns are she, her. I am presently the executive director of NAAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. And we're a civil rights organization that has been around since 1969, doing fat advocacy work and building fat community. And presently we are also one of the co-founders with our colleagues at FLAIR, which is the fat legal organization, of the Campaign for Size Freedom, which works on supporting pending legislation related to banning size discrimination, and then also works on changing the narrative around the need for that kind of legal protection and and for structural change related to size discrimination.
Cool. Yes, I definitely want to get into that. And for folks who missed the episode with the Broadway Body Positivity Project, they totally brought this up. So yes, I'm excited for people to hear more about it. Let's dive into the New York law first. And
yeah, well, that's probably where they brought it up, because Stephanie Lexis, who runs that project, was one of the folks who testified at the New York City Council. Mm-hmm. So last year, in February, there was testimony on a bill brought forward by Council Member Sean Abreu, at least in this iteration. And that bill was to ban height and weight discrimination in housing, public accommodation, and employment in New York City. And it passed the city council and was signed into law by the mayor, and then went into effect in November. So we now have, that makes New York the 7th city or municipality. Technically, DC is not a city, technically. Mm-hmm. So the 7th municipality in the U.S. to have some kind of law banning size discrimination. And then also the state of Michigan has a statewide civil rights law that height and weight are included as protected classes in their civil rights law. And then the state of Washington has some protections through a Supreme Court decision. Nice. So that's it. In the whole country, those are the places. Like, it's those cities are, let's see, Urbana, Illinois, Madison, Wisconsin, Washington, D.C., Santa Cruz, California, San Francisco, California, Binghamton, New York, which was the most recent one until New York City passed, and then now New York City. And then there are a bunch of places where that there are some pending laws that we are hoping to see some movement on this year.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us anything about the process into getting New York City's recent bill? I know there was a lot that I saw on social media, and I just want people, really to know if and how in the future they can be doing these things as well.
Absolutely. So in New York City, the story actually starts with then council member, now city comptroller Brad Lander, who introduced a bill a few years ago, and with great support from Lydia Green, who is a district leader in New York City. And that bill, the bill didn't pass the city council then. I think it just kind of stalled out. And then Councilmember Abreu brought it forward last year, or actually introduced it in the summer of 2022. And then it was, voted on last year. But partly because of constituent, feedback and interest, and partly because of his just sort of looking around the city around him and thinking very much about intersectional civil rights and like what was missing, but also partly because he gained some weight during the pandemic and learned firsthand what it's like to have to deal with people's dumbass ideas about body size stuff. And so he had he had a personal investment, but he also had just the, I think the political will to like make sure that he was expanding kinds of civil rights in the city, that he was working with folks to expand those civil rights. And so we got involved in the bill. We actually first heard about it in a Bloomberg article that I was quoted in talking about some other aspects of legislation, and the folks from RWDSU, Josh from RWDSU in New York was quoted also in the same article. And in New York City, the labor community had gotten involved pretty early with Councilmember Abreu, because they are, always keeping an eye on what City Hall is doing. And they were hearing from their membership about, grievances related to body size and unfair treatment in the workplace. Yeah. So it's actually like the labor movement actually was on the scene first there in New York City before we were, as like fat rights folks or fat liberation folks. And then we reached out to them and started partnering with them. And so by the time the bill went to hearing, we were working really closely with RWDSU, Retail Action, which is the Retail Action Project, RAP, which is like the workers' rights organization for retail employees who are not in unionized settings. And then FLAIR, of course, the Fat Legal Advocacy, Rights, and Education Project, which is our partner in the Campaign for Size Freedom, and us. And so the bill was already drafted. The bill was already in progress by the time we got involved in New York City. So where we came in with support was like helping drum up media support, having a rally at the Capitol, helping organize folks to testify in favor of the bill. So we had a great turnout in favor of the bill. And then helping just build on the narrative as the bill was going through in New York City to bring in more support in the city council, to get more constituents to reach out to their representatives, and to support what Councilmember Abreu was doing in terms of trying to get, to sort of politic from the inside, right? Like, so for bringing all the outside support, and then some of the media attention, because what we were really clear about is like, New York is the global city. So even though this is only one specific location, there is a huge opportunity here to create a lot of attention and to inspire people in a lot of other places. And then we also, with FLAIR, started, working with the Human Rights Commission to make sure that they were supported in implementing the bill, that things were like, that the voices around the need here were fat-led, because even though height and weight discrimination impacts people of all body sizes, we know that the opposition to bills about that often comes in around the fat folks. Like, nobody's like, I'm so mad tall people want to have extra leg room at something. Like, nobody is like, how dare they, right? But there are all these, people who get like pissed off at the fatties. And so just making sure that like authentic lived experience of fat people was being considered, and actual fat people who have the most like access needs and things like that around, around this kind of systemic discrimination. So we love the Human Rights Commission there. They, they had to take a sort of non-committal stance before the bill had passed, but it was clear that they were already preparing for how to implement and what they could do if the bill didn't pass to create more things from their department. And like, they just have been really, really incredible, like truly allies, that word gets thrown around a lot, but like truly allies. And there are folks in that department with lived experience in larger bodies. And so, so we're just doing like those educational pieces, like, what can we teach you about intersectional fat rights, things that you might be missing, things that you might be missing about how this impacts multiply marginalized people in different ways. Our colleagues at Flair, like things that you might be missing around, like how this might show up in legal cases or, filing a grievance with the Human Rights Commission. And so we had these different ways of being involved. And then we also got to really be involved in celebrating when the bill passed, just creating some like buzz around that, again, to have it be an inspiration point for others.
Totally.
And then also we love the New York City bill because it is New York City and it is millions of people, and it doesn't only apply to people who are residents of the city. It also applies to visitors. So it's millions and millions and millions of people that, could it was a story that was like queer folks were working on getting some legislation passed, and they looked around and said, like, who else needs protections? Oh, we should think about body size. And so they brought that in. So I think like there's different ways to do it in different places. Certainly introducing legislation through a bill is dramatically less expensive than something like a ballot initiative, which we're not really thinking about too much. But at the campaign for Size Freedom, is, like I said, it's a project that tries to get people to better understand why we should have legislation related to body size, and then supports that legislation. All of the legislation we're supporting right now is legislation that was already introduced when we formed last year.
Okay.
And so we're working with the bills as they exist, or working on amendments to the bills to make them stronger. And they're already in progress. And then we're looking at where are places that we can help support. There are a few places that we're helping local organizers try to, get ready to work with their representatives to support things there. And the places that are already in progress are Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey.
Okay.
There is actively work in Colorado being done. And we have, there's also a weight-based bullying bill in Colorado that's already been introduced that will be voted on this year. And then there are some other places that I don't really want to start naming those places quite yet. But the thing to do if you're interested and you don't know how to get started is to sign our petition for the Campaign for Size Freedom, which you can find at naafa.org/sizefreedom, NAAFA.org. And once you're on that mailing, and say yes to the mailing list question, because then when we have alerts, there are people in your area who are telling us they're organizing. Do you want to know more about that? We can, sort our mailing list by zip code and let you know.
Wow.
For wherever you are, if we know folks are working on stuff. So that's a great, you can get started without us. You don't need the campaign. If you know how the system works where you are, you don't need us. But what I will say to folks is the team at Flair is super informed about how these laws work, how they can then get applied in court cases later, or what it's like to try court cases in places where there are not these laws. And they're super informed about the intersections of these laws and disability laws, and what the laws should look like to be most effective. And it is much better to pass a sound law in the first place than to have to try to do catch-up work or repair work later. So if you're listening to the pod and you're thinking about doing this yourself, I highly recommend that at a minimum you reach out to the folks at Flair, or us together as the Campaign for Size Freedom, to at least touch base, and that you look at the model legislation that Flair has written that's available on their website, which is flairproject.org. Because you want the bill drafters in wherever you are to be looking at something that's already solid, already well-researched, has already considered how things have been tested and worked or failed for decades with disability law, and where those parallels are, and all of that. So they really are truly, they have an expertise around this, not just around sort of the politics of passing it, but the mechanics of getting the bill right. That I just if you just want to be on your own, you want to be the champion of a bill yourself, with these organizations that already have, some media reputation, or I'm an influencer and I want this to be on my cred or whatever, whatever your thing is, we hope you'll work in partnership with us, because we want to work in partnership and coalition with folks. We founded the campaign together. We got some support from Dove to found the campaign.
Yeah.
And to launch the campaign. And we founded it together because we felt it was really important for it to be fat-led. But we don't want it to be the NAAFA and Flair campaign of making laws for fat people. We don't want it. We want it to be the NAAFA and Flair work with other organizations, individuals, local activists. So for example, in Massachusetts, where there is a bill pending, and where there are two really great sponsors of the bill, Senator Roush and Representative Nguyen, really great sponsors. There was a hearing in December for, public testimony in support of the bill. We worked with Bigger Bodies Boston to support them in getting people out, to support them in having, a pizza party, to make posters, or, to spread the word. We did a planning session together where people could come and ask questions about their testimony. And that's what we want to do, is work with the local activists around it. So if you don't know who the local activists are where you are, then reach out and we'll help you figure you figure that out. And if there aren't anywhere, like I live in a small town outside of Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And if I wanted to do work in Phoenix, there are a few folks I could reach out to. And if I wanted to go to my own city council here, I don't know who that would be.
Sure.
Right? I'd have to go to my own petition and sort it to see if there's anybody else that is where I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like a lot of folks who are listening are going to be in those kinds of situations. Like there's nothing wrong with having another small town pass these bills.
Mm.
Right? It's just something else to build on. It's something else to help build the case when a state wants to do it.
Cool.
You know, globally, there's a city in Iceland that's like one of the only places outside of the US that has this kind of legislation. You could be the Reykjavik, Iceland of Kansas. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So people should also not feel like, oh, it's only if I live in LA, Chicago, Miami. Like, it's not that. It will be harder to pass, especially state level legislation, in places where there's a lot of dialogue around woke politics.
Sure.
That doesn't necessarily mean it will be impossible,
mm-hmm.
but it will be harder in those places. What we ultimately want to see is a federal bill, right? You want to see a change to the U.S. Civil Rights Act that adds these as protected classes at a federal level. And just the political landscape of now, that's going to be nearly impossible without more state level wins to prove that, that there's a will for it and that the business community supports it. I mean, one of the great things about having Dove support is that it was an example that like, it's not all businesses are not saying this will be too expensive and it's a terrible idea. Like a major business is, there's all kinds of things to consider about, Dove and Unilever, which is their parent company, and politics and what that means in liberation. And there's all kinds of stuff to consider. But from a perspective of passing these laws, what you can't argue is no major business would support this because a major business is supporting it, right?
Can you tell us more about that partnership and what that looked like? So they reached out to you.
They reached out to us. Dove did a lot of work in support of the Crown Act.
Yeah.
And for folks who are listening who might not know what that is the federal legislation also passed at the state level and municipal level in many places, but ultimately pursued federally to protect folks from discrimination based on a natural hairstyles for folks of African descent. Mm-hmm. And the Crown Act was... they worked on it with the National Urban League and a couple of the respectable social justice or civil rights organizations, establishment organizations, and organizations with more resource than we have in our organization or our entire movement, really. But folks who are really doing like real on the ground work, right? We also saw some changes at Dove as a brand when they were doing that work. More representation of lots of different kinds of Black folks, especially women and femmes in their, Dove's a beauty company, right? So more focus on women and femmes than on their men's skincare line or whatever they have for guys. So we saw that they were doing that work. We spent a lot of time vetting Dove because we wanted to know, like, is this like, do y'all have like a stretch mark cream coming or something? So you just want to win over the fat people? Like what's going on here? And of course, like, it's no secret to folks who work in fat activist spaces that, that Dove was one of the brands that people feel co-opted body positivity.
Can you tell me more about that?
Well, Dove had a campaign about 20 years ago. Yeah. Called the Real Beauty Campaign. And it was very similar to what happened like last month what was that brand last month that put out this ad that was like, sexy is a feeling, not a body type. And then they had like, a size range of, 3 dress sizes or whatever in the pictures. I can't think of what brand that was, but
okay, I'll put it at the
intro. It wasn't Victoria's Secret, but it was like same taste, different smell, or whatever that expression is. It was like, it was like that, except 20 years ago.
Yes.
And 20 years ago, that looked more revolutionary to more people. It didn't look revolutionary to people who were seriously committed to like radical body politics. But to people who were just exposed to mainstream media, it was revolutionary for mainstream media.
Yes.
It was like, oh, Dove's Real Beauty Project with people who are 30 instead of 20 and people who are size 12 instead of size 2 and people who are, and people who are a few different shades of skin tones. Like, it was the bar was so low that they were impressing people with a really, really dramatic shift in diversity. And also, a lot of people, including me, like I was literally part of like an alternative campaign, but it was like it was a whole like photo campaign that was like, let's actually show some actual age diversity and body diversity and disabled folks and trans folks and like, you know, all in the same, not just sort of like a barely different variation of the beauty standard. And so, you know, but a lot of people felt like Dove's talking that body positivity talk so they can sell their soap.
Yes.
And they were not the only ones. And also, it should be noted that most brands were just not talking that body positivity talk at all. So there, you know, you can come in on that a few different ways, right? Like you come in on that of like, well, that makes them even more insidious. Or you can say like, they're not getting it right, but they're trying to do something that other brands aren't even trying to do. And we were somewhere in the middle of that because I was, Beyond Beauty. The thing I was part of was called Beyond Beauty. So like, I am someone who was like literally part of a protest campaign when Dove's Real Beauty thing came out. But I am also someone who was a high school teacher.
Yeah.
When Dove's Beauty campaign, you know, came out, and they provided some tools and curriculum that had things like I remember this video I used to use with my students that was all like showing how things are manipulated behind the scenes to get to a billboard, or to get to an ad in a magazine. And that was like not that far from a time when magazines were still lying and saying they weren't airbrushing things or weren't manipulating photos or whatever. So there are ways in which like, if you're just like straight anti-capitalist, Dove is it's capitalism, right? Like it's still Dove. They are still a brand. They are still trying to sell things, you know? And so like you have to weigh out that sort of like, do the ends justify the means of like, if we get money from Dove and that helps us launch this campaign that changes laws to make fat people's lives better, is it worth it or is that blood money? Like where we came down on it was, we saw some real change at Dove and we had some belief based on their work with Crown that they were going to continue to, you know, support things whether it was impacting their marketing or not. Like full disclosure, Dove also has a black hair care line. So were they just purely invested in Crown because we love black folks and want their nappy hair not to be discriminated against, or also we want to sell them stuff for their nappy hair? Like it's always a question whenever any kind of brand is involved. But we did a lot of vetting and we ultimately decided like, this is a good opportunity. There's, never been this kind of corporate funding for Fat Lib. And, you know, again, some people would be like, and there never should have been. You blew it. But at the same time, like it created resource in a way that the movement has never had. And so we were happy with the support of the launch because they really did put us in the driver's seat. It was really sort of like, we're only going to do this if you let us figure out what the campaign looks like.
Okay.
And if you let us lead on things like talking about the legislation, and like, this is not gonna be like the Dove Act for fat rights or whatever. Like we're not gonna have that. So they also funded the first, as far as we can tell, the first fellowship of its kind anywhere for fat liberation at Flair. And that the Flair, Size Freedom fellow, you know, works on supporting Flair in all the things that they do for fat legal rights, in addition to working on this campaign. Okay. So there was like there's sort of like, I think it's been a good partnership. You know, I think it's been a good partnership for launching, and then we'll see where we go from here. You know, we've been working with them for a year and a little over a year. We launched the campaign right around the same time as the New York hearing, actually. So, and, you know, I think we'll see where it goes, and it also makes other companies and foundations and small businesses and things like that interested in fat liberation. Okay. And again, like, it's difficult to walk that line of like, well, is this a right partnership? Is this a partnership that does more harm than good? Is this a partnership that does more good than harm? Like, how do we balance all that stuff out? And I think we kind of take it on a case by case basis. Yeah. But it was for us, it was a good starting point.
Awesome.
You know, Aubrey Gordon's new book came out around the same time, which had like a whole chapter that was like, Dove is the company that co-opted positivity. And I was like, oh my God, everybody's going to be mad. And because everybody who didn't know this, because they weren't paying attention or don't know the story of the Real Beauty or whatever, you know, they're just going to be mad. But it was part of the reason they came to us was they were refreshing some of the research, or they were doing new research around. They focus on women and girls, and they're increasingly inclusive of what women and girls means in terms of like non-binary femmes and stuff like that. But they still use the language women and girls most of the time. But they do all this self-esteem stuff around girls. Yeah. And some of that research is really important research. It's hard for us to get that kind of quality research because that kind of quality research is really expensive. And so we're always up against these like obesity awareness groups in quotation marks that have tremendous funding from Diet Pharma and from, you know, weight loss surgeons and blah, 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 that have all these, you know, stats they can drop and new reports coming out and all the things about the cost of obesity. Scary. Ooh, the cost of obesity, the cost of obesity. And so part of Dove coming to us wanting to work on this was their latest report, which was what they were calling the real cost of beauty standards, where they were doing like sort of economically quantifying how much hurting people with beauty standards, including body size standards, was costing us. And I have mixed feelings about that because I think the human cost and the economic cost should not always be conflated.
Right.
And at the same time, having those stats to fight some of the other stats, like actually, it's not, you know, obesity that's cost these millions and millions of dollars. It's anti-fatness that cost these millions and millions of dollars. Like that, I also think, you know, has been really valuable.
Yeah. So that was a great segue. I was going to go from Dove to like obesity in quotation marks industry. So let's talk. Yeah. So jumping out of some of it, I remember
Shakes fist.
Yeah. The Obesity Action Committee or Coalition or something, but tell us where everything stands right now.
So everything stands on Ozempic right now, as is no great surprise to your listeners, I'm sure. And when I say Ozempic, I kind of mean like all of those drugs in that class, which just like Novo Nordisk beat everybody else to the punch with trending and marketing around it. And it's going to be called Ozempic all the time, even though
that's a good point.
Really the weight loss version of that drug is not Ozempic. It is Wegovy, and really then Eli Lilly, which is another pharmaceutical company, has their own. And like there's all these other things that they're all actually called. And also like you just call all of the acetaminophen Tylenol. You call it all that, and you call all the painkillers Tylenol. Ozempic is that, right? So, to most people in the public. And so a lot stands with those drugs right now because they have the media's attention, they have the public's attention, and they have policymakers' attention. It has been a long game that those drug companies and other folks in the quote unquote weight management industry, which should be referred to as the weight cycling industry, but that's by management, they mean we're going to keep trying to make you smaller, and when that doesn't work, you're going to get bigger again, and then we're going to try again. So that's weight cycling, folks. And so the weight cycling industry, and I think, I thank Deb Burgard for regularly reminding me about the care with that language. The weight cycling industry has had a very long game plan to get these drugs FDA approved and to get them covered by Medicaid.
Okay.
To be covered by Medicaid and Medicare. And so, and private insurance too, but like getting the government money or the national health system in in England, that's been a not that secret plan. Like it's pretty clear that that's what their playbook is if you're watching, but who's watching the playbook of pharmaceutical companies behind the scenes other than, some researchers and scholars and activists and folks like, you're not just like, oh, Family Feud's over. Let me read a bunch of articles about Eli Lilly and how they plan to take over but I think we should approach all pharmaceutical companies with the same skepticism that we should have learned from the opioid epidemic and should have been approaching those pharmaceutical companies with in the first place. And so there's this juggernaut around these drugs, and the obesity advocacy organizations, which present themselves as grassroots organizations, are mostly funded by organizations like this, like by businesses like this, by weight loss surgeons, professional organizations, and by directly by Novo Nordisk, which
Yeah.
is the manufacturer of Ozempic, and Eli Lilly, which is the manufacturer of Mounjaro. And you know, there and by commercial diet industry folks that you recognize, like WW, which you can probably tell from my tone how I feel about that. And so like you have an organization like you mentioned the Obesity Action Coalition, and they are one of the ones that's been sort of like my pet obesity awareness organization because of not just their involvement with all this stuff, but also their tremendously deep involvement with the whale last year. And so I just have all the bones to pick with them in all the ways. You know, you can just you can look at their annual report and they will tell you we had a $7 million budget. You know, we had an $8 million budget. $7 million of it came from diet companies, diet pharma, and surgical, support organizations. Yeah. And so that is what it is. But one of the things it is astroturfing a lot.
Yeah.
Where astroturfing is like when an organization presents itself as neutral, but then there's actually, some whole other plan behind it. It's like it's like the amusement park guy under the old man mask and Scooby-Doo, right? Like it's that. And it's so much that from these obesity awareness organizations, or they would refer to themselves as support organizations for Americans living with the chronic illness of obesity. The problem for many of us who are in fat advocacy is the classification of obesity as a disease in the first place is problematic and is presented as universally supported by all medical and health professionals and researchers, which is in fact not true. Mm-hmm. There's a large segment and growing segment, I think, of those professionals who actually think we're not doing that right at all. Like we all think BMI is terrible. It's all based on BMI. We're not doing any of it right. We need to be thinking about weight neutral and individualized care for people. And so there's this presentation of obesity as a disease, which we're all supposed to be grateful for. We're supposed to be grateful that finally we are talking about it as the complicated disease that it is. And that is supposed to create relief in me as a fat person, because now no one is blaming me for being fat, because instead they are sympathetic to the fact that I have this lifelong disease that I'm going to have to battle with treatment and drugs and maybe surgery and all these other things. And people are going to be sympathetic to that now instead of biased.
Right.
Well, that hasn't really borne out. It's not like obesity was declared a disease and then all the weight stigma went away. That's not how any of this has worked. And also, you have to ask questions when all of the people, or at least all the organizations that are telling you that it's a complicated disease that needs treatment and that the government should be paying for that treatment, are telling you that through marketing tools that have been developed by pharmaceutical companies for them.
Yeah.
Or funded by pharmaceutical companies for them. Or funded by Weight Watchers, or funded by, you have to ask the questions. You have to take the mask off the Scooby-Doo villain, and then see, do you still want to let this guy run the amusement park now? Probably you don't, or maybe you at least have some questions, right? And so I end rant for now. Please ask some more targeted questions, because I'll just keep going off about these organizations.
Well, I would love your thoughts on the Queen Latifah, It's Bigger Than Me. I have not addressed it anywhere just because it breaks my heart. But also, two, it's just so much of that intersection between Blackness and fatness and shame, and it's so much.
Well, and this is why it feels like a good place to discuss it here with you, with somebody who I know has that lens, who does work around that, who understands the complications of that, and is, hopefully attracting listeners who really want to learn more about that and be thoughtful about those intersections. Because on the one hand, it is hard for me to talk about, like, from Oprah on down, right?
Yeah.
Like, all the Black folks associated, because I also like Oprah and like people just being like, oh, she's taking Ozempic for her health. Okay, yeah, but that's also a hell of a lot of free advertising for Weight Watchers, which she is a stakeholder in, right? And so these are all complicated things, right? And it is like, there's so much scrutiny on Black women and our bodies. And especially if you are a darker Black woman in your body, a black woman or femme, there's so much scrutiny. And also, I don't want to give folks a pass because of that. So on the one hand, I don't want to listen to a lot of sort of like generic body positive folks who don't especially folks who are privileged in their bodies. I don't want to listen to a whole bunch of like, thin white ladies and their like white feminism take on Oprah or Queen Latifah or any of these celebrities. Hell, even Anthony Anderson, he out there advertising this diabetes stuff that is funded by Novo Nordisk, right?
Yeah.
Like even him, and he's problematic in all kinds of ways. I still want to listen to it from certain commentators, but I do want us to have thoughtful dialogue about it with folks who actually do understand the nuances so that other folks can be learning from that dialogue. And so I feel much more comfortable talking about this here than in some settings. I'm a Black woman myself. I have privilege as, being light-skinned and being mixed race. But I've still been Black for, 50 years almost and fat for 40 of those or whatever. I am the spokesperson for the world's oldest fat rights organization. So there's that part too. And documented fat rights organization. We always make that distinction because I know who else was doing fat rights work before this organization was founded. But like, as a formal organized thing, we've been around a hell of a long time, and I inherit all of the best parts of that legacy in addition to dealing with the other parts. And so like, I've got all these different points of entry into the conversation. I feel like that's different than some of the people who are just flapping their lips about whatever they think about Queen Latifah, right? And so having said that very long disclaimer, Queen Latifah is a paid spokesperson for Novo Nordisk. Yeah. This is not the same thing as like Queen Latifah's founded a health organization for Black women, or Queen Latifah is just speaking from her own personal lived experience. And the It's Better Than Me campaign is a campaign in which everyone is a paid spokesperson. And, people deserve to be paid for their labor. I'm paid for my labor. That's new. That's new. That's very new at NAAFA or in Fat Liberation movement in general, right? I'm paid for my labor. We paid the speakers that come on our webinar series. So it's not that it's inherently bad that people are paid, but it's just that, you want that. Had an awakening and learned that this is not like their reparations project, right? Like this is not that. This is like, oh shit, we can make a whole bunch more money if we get Black folks roped into this, especially if we can get insurance companies or the government to pay for it. Because then we don't even have to care about Black people's economic viability because we can get somebody else to pay for it for the Black people. And you know what'll be even more effective? If we tell them they're racist if they don't, right? And so it's increasingly popular for sort of like obesity experts, in quotation marks, or advocates for people living with the chronic disease of obesity. All of this in it, like, if you're listening and you can't see me on a video, like I'm air quoting that, like I'm getting cramps in my fingers, air quoting over here. It's becoming increasingly popular for those folks to say, if we care about Black and brown communities, we have to provide accessible treatment for obesity to those communities because obesity is killing people. Now, from the counterpoint argument that I would make is, Or anti-fatness is killing those people. And we have to provide accessible healthcare around all diseases, conditions, medical needs, not just around obesity treatment. Maybe not around obesity treatment at all. But if we're going to, if we can't strike that from the record, if we can't get obesity is a disease, off the record from the World Health Organization on down to the American Medical Association, we can't make that change. At a minimum, can we at least get them to say, let's provide accessible healthcare to the Black and brown people for all of the things? To the fat people for all of the things? Because right now what they're saying is, let's provide it for obesity care.
Right.
Well, you don't care about my health then. If you care about my health, you will not only be advocating for me to have obesity care as the only form of health care I have. That's ridiculous. If you care about my health, you want me to have all that. I have an earache. I need something for that. It's not Ozempic, right? Yeah. And it's not something that costs $1,200 that you make mostly profit off of.
Sure.
It's these eardrops that I can't get at $15 and I need insurance to cover that. Right. And so you will give it to me in my Black and brown community, or in my fat body, or in my fat body in my Black and brown community. If you only care when it's about the most lucrative diseases, you only care when it's about obesity, because you can sell those expensive ass drugs, and you can sell those expensive ass surgeries, and you can sell those other weight management products that you just made a public apology, Weight Watchers, for admitting that you've been wrong for decades, but you still gonna do it for anybody who doesn't want the other things, right? If you cared about my health, you would not only care when it's in those areas. So this narrative that is coming from some of the most prominent and most quoted obesity experts in the media around, like, it's a form of racism that we don't care. It's systemic injustice that we don't care enough to treat Black people for their chronic disease of obesity. That's why they have diabetes. No, it's not. What about the thin Black diabetics? You want to try to help them too? Right? So what if racism is the reason we have diabetics? What you gonna do about that, Ozempic? So it's just it's all preposterous to me. And also, most people haven't been exposed to this kind of questioning of, we love Queen Latifah and she's just trying to get healthy.
Yeah. Or
we want her to be healthy because we want the Queen to live a long time. UNITY. And, and we just, we want her to be healthy. We want her to live, and it's her personal choice if she wants to lose weight. And you're just a hater if you think that, if you say anything else about that. And it's I'm not a hater. You know why? Because I don't hate thin people. If she wants to be thinner, or if she chooses thinness, I know you talk about this in your work. If she chooses to pursue thinness or thinnerness as a survival tactic in this world where she has to survive, and Ashley Marie Preston was on one of the It's Bigger Than Me episodes talking about this. I admire Ashley's activism in so many ways, right? We don't agree on weight loss surgery as saving grace, or that, that everybody who has these things are being, shamed about having made these choices. I think that sometimes that's true. And I also think there's a constructed narrative from the obesity organizations that that's true. But she talks about this too. I made a survival choice. If you're thinking of it as a survival choice, you get to make that choice. But I still want all of us to be asking questions about why you had to. Yeah. And how we're creating an environment that forces other people to make that choice. So, I want all of these folks to be healthy. I don't think it's the healthiest relationship to be in a relationship with Novo Nordisk. Right. But it might be because you're eating off that, right? Because they're paying you. So
the money spent.
It's the sort of health and maybe beauty standard and economic parallel of the sort of do we love Hattie McDaniel because she was doing what she had to do, or are we mad at Hattie McDaniel because she became a millionaire off playing a maid or whatever? Yes and no. It's complicated. All of this, it's all very complicated. And I don't want to direct all of my concerns about the systemic issues to the individuals who are making tough choices within fucked up systems. Like, I don't want to waive accountability for them, but I also don't want to, A, make their choices for them, and B, enable other people to not see them as like multifaceted, nuanced humans making those choices.
Totally.
Right.
Which is definitely a reason I haven't brought it up anywhere, social media.
Yeah. So like, I'm still going to watch Living Single.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to boycott Queen Latifah because she's doing this campaign.
No.
But when the campaign comes up, I'm going to say the real things about the campaign.
Totally.
And I'm going to hope that we are building a world where she could be a paid spokesperson for NAAFA and make the same kind of money because there's enough support for, for NAAFA and No Lose and Fat Rose and ASDA and like all of, and all of these local organizers or local, event planners. I mean, I didn't start as an activist. I started by throwing a hip hop party in Oakland.
Yes, you did. We haven't even got into that.
We haven't.
No. Hold on.
We might have to do a sequel. I'm like, the 4-hour episode of Making It Awkward. I came to this as like, I was a high school administrator by day and I was a hip hop nightclub promoter by night. And I was actually a nerd throwing a hip hop party. So that was already weird enough. And then, starting this like fat black, mostly black and POC centered hip hop party in Oakland. And why did I bring that up right now specifically? Because there are all kinds of different ways we could be like funding fat joy and funding fat participation in community and like funding fat accessibility and funding fat things that don't have to be saving fat people from fat.
Totally.
It doesn't have to be like, like hopefully we're building a world where more people get to make the choice of like, I made this really dope ass, 20-minute mini documentary video, and it was for 4 fat people living their best lives, and it was not underwritten by Novo Nordisk like some of those things aren't. Novo Nordisk underwrote one of the fat films that was at the Tribeca Film Festival last year. And a lot of people saw that film and did not know it was underwritten by them. So we're celebrating this. Oh, yay, this is so great. Look at this fat visibility, and it's fat visibility funded by Novo Nordisk. And maybe other people are okay with that. I'm not. So what I want to see is enough funding for us to make some other videos that are not that, right? And hire some other people and pay some other people so we can have, the fat fashion show and the fat pool party and the fat, and the things that are just like genuine representation of lots of different kind of people with different kinds of bodies and different kinds of needs too. It doesn't all have to be exclusively fat, but like that fat folks get to do stuff, be paid well for doing stuff. And the only people paying them well for doing stuff are not the Obesity Action Coalition and, and the drug companies and the Weight Watchers ad. I just like actresses have to make those decisions. Am I going to play this maid or am I going to not work? Today's fat black actresses are having to, am I going to be in this, commercial for Weight Watchers or not work? I want them to have something else. I want them to have something else. So
how can people get involved with NAAFA and give you money?
Well, you can give us money any time of the year at our website, naafa.org, and it's under the Give area. And you can donate directly to us. You can, if you got it like that, you can give us stock, you can put us in your will, you can, all of the things that you can do to give to a charitable organization. And we are a 501c3 charity. You can also, if we are not your jam or whatever, or whatever people say now, you can meet people through us by attending our virtual events, like come to our webinar, learn about other people, fund them directly if you don't want to fund us. You saw us talking to somebody on our webinar that you think is doing really amazing stuff. Just go support them. Like, we want your support. Of course, we want to. I mean, like, I want to keep getting paid too. Like, I want to keep having a job and not being a volunteer as I was for most of the years that I've worked for NAAFA, even when I was the full-time board chair. And, I don't talk about like my money only as a like signal to the universe that I want to keep getting money, but also it is actually like being able to pay an executive director at a fat rights organization is building infrastructure for the movement. It's not just about like, that means Tigress can pay her phone bill. It's also about like, that means NAAFA can apply for different grants to get more funding to do more things. That means NAAFA can expand to hire more people, to have more people getting paid to do this labor. And so, so like all of that stuff is actually important. So I hope that folks feel inspired to fund our work. And also, I still live in Fat Community when I'm not working for NAAFA. And if there's something else in Fat Community that inspires you, if you have the means, buy from the designers that are doing, ethically made clothing for fat people so that they can keep doing that. So we can have more of that, right? You don't have to, if you don't have the means and you need to get your stuff from Shein or Walmart or whoever, like, do what you have to do. You know how to manage your life. But if you have the means, get that $300 dress from the independent designer who hand sewed it so that they can keep doing that work, right? And do that across the board. The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker of Fat Community, and especially when those fat folks are from multiply marginalized backgrounds and identities, because then they have even more things stacked against them economically, right? So like, yes, please give us money. Oh, please. But also, do that in community with intention in all the ways. And then, whatever time you have, whatever you support, the things that you click like on, the things that you put comments on, the things that you share, all of that builds exposure. Likes beget likes. I used to always tell the women who modeled for my nightclub, so like everything we post because then more people see it. That is all still true, especially as social media platforms continue to discriminate against larger bodies. In terms of, people getting shadow banned or things getting taken down, accounts getting closed for violations that are not violations, because the reason your picture had more skin was not because you were more naked. It's just because you literally have more skin because you have a larger body, like, or more skin showing or whatever. And so like all of the support things, like we have virtual events right now. They're all free. We'd like to keep them free. We can only do that if we have funding to keep them free. But we have lots of different kinds of virtual events. Some of them are more educational. Some of them are like this, just like dialogues with fat people we love. Some of them are a little more social or interactive with breakout room time so you can meet other fat people there. And, we have a wide variety of things, especially during Fat Liberation Month, which is in August, but we have virtual events all year. And even as the world continues to be, increasingly open and interactive in real life, we are going to keep doing lots of virtual events so that folks who can't or won't do real life stuff have those options still, where a lot of other places stopped doing virtual events and just went back to real life. We're going to keep doing them. And then I just want to say this because somebody said it on our webinar last week. Comedian Chris Grace was with us on our webinar, and I asked him for a final thought, and he said, date fat people. And I just want to say, like, yes, because it's not just date fat people. It's also like be with fat people and not only in like weight loss pursuit spaces, like go to fat events if you're going to events, and do whatever you need to do to feel good about going to events, but make them fat ones too. And take other people and have other people spend their money, and also get your thin friends to spend some money. If we're having a fundraiser and you only share it with the other fat people, then we are only taking money out of the pockets of the other fat people, right? If you date thin people, they should be fun. You are fat and you date thin people and they're not funding fat liberation movement. Why are you giving them some nani? Right? Because like we just have to do like a lot of, I just want us to be really intentional about supporting those who support us back. Thanks. That's what I'm saying. That's the point, right?
It was beautiful.
And so
I loved it.
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, if you're with your time, with your money, with your attention, all of the things.
Tigress, this was fantastic. I am so grateful. And as you said, there's still so much to talk about from both of our time in Oakland. So I would love to have you back.
Yes, I would love to do that again.
Okay. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Right. And thank you all for spending this hour with us.
Yes. Thanks again to Tigress. As you could tell, we could have talked forever. I hope to bring her back soon. You can check out the links she mentioned in the show notes. Next week's episode will be with gender-affirming surgeon Blair Peters from OHSU. We talk about BMI limits in surgery and why these surgeries have limits when others, like hysterectomies, do not. We also talk about why some surgeons have BMI limits while others don't. It's another conversation that will have a follow-up episode, and I'll seek your feedback at makingitawkwardpod@gmail.com. If you're liking what you're hearing, we'd love a rating or review. Until next time, keep making it awkward. This has been Making It Awkward. I'm Jessica Wilson. You can watch this episode on YouTube and Spotify. It's a production of The Body Politic and supported by Patreon members and the legacy of Sacramento Outboard Services. All of the social media clips you see are done by Jen Jacobs, who also edits and mixes the show.